Throughout human history, civilizations have risen in fertile river valleys, productive grasslands, and regions blessed with rich soil. But soil is not permanent. It can be depleted, eroded, and exhausted. When societies depend entirely on agriculture, the health of their soil becomes the foundation of everything else: their economy, their population, their stability. Soil degradation is a slow process. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic signs. Instead, it unfolds over generations. Fields that once produced abundant harvests gradually yield less. Farmers work harder for smaller returns. Communities that relied on surplus food find themselves with barely enough to sustain themselves. This decline happens for recognizable reasons. Intensive farming without crop rotation depletes nutrients from the soil. Clearing forests and vegetation removes natural barriers that hold soil in place. When rain falls on exposed land, it washes away the topsoil, carrying with it the organic matter that makes agriculture possible. Over time, what was once productive land becomes thin, dry, and unable to support the crops that fed entire populations. Evidence from archaeological sites shows this pattern across different civilizations. In Mesopotamia, historians suggest that soil salinization contributed to agricultural decline. Irrigation systems brought water to fields, but in hot, dry climates, that water evaporated, leaving salt deposits behind. Over centuries, these deposits accumulated, poisoning the soil and reducing crop yields. Research points to similar patterns in the Maya lowlands. Intensive agriculture supported growing cities, but deforestation and soil erosion gradually undermined that productivity. As populations expanded, more land was cleared and cultivated. The soil, however, had limits. Without adequate time to recover, fields became less fertile. Communities faced food shortages, and the social systems built on agricultural surplus began to weaken. The consequences of soil degradation extend beyond hunger. When harvests decline, economies contract. Trade networks that once moved grain, goods, and wealth begin to fail. Tax revenues fall because there is less to tax. Governments struggle to maintain infrastructure, fund public works, or support administrative institutions. What begins as an environmental problem becomes an economic and political crisis. Social structures also depend on agricultural stability. When food becomes scarce, competition for resources intensifies. Migration increases as people leave degraded lands in search of better opportunities. This movement strains neighboring regions and disrupts established social relationships. Communities fragment, and the bonds that held societies together begin to fray. Administrative systems, once effective, find themselves unable to manage these cascading pressures. Bureaucracies designed for times of plenty lack the flexibility to adapt to scarcity. Institutions that coordinated labor, managed irrigation, or distributed resources become rigid and ineffective. As problems multiply, the capacity to solve them diminishes. The decline is rarely sudden. It unfolds over decades, sometimes centuries. Each generation inherits slightly worse conditions than the one before. Adjustments are made, but they are often insufficient. By the time the severity of soil degradation becomes undeniable, the damage is already deeply embedded in the landscape and the society. Archaeological evidence reveals additional dimensions of this decline. Skeletal remains from affected regions often show signs of nutritional deficiency, indicating populations that experienced chronic food insecurity. Settlement patterns shift as well, with larger population centers fragmenting into smaller, dispersed communities. This dispersal reflects not just migration, but the breakdown of the centralized systems that once organized society. The relationship between soil health and political authority is particularly revealing. Rulers and elites maintain their positions partly through their ability to ensure food security and manage resources. When agricultural productivity declined, their legitimacy eroded. Temples, palaces, and administrative centers that once received regular tributes of grain found their supplies diminishing. The monumental construction projects that demonstrated power and religious devotion became impossible to sustain. Different regions responded to soil degradation in different ways, shaped by their specific environmental conditions and social structures. Some societies attempted terracing to prevent erosion, creating stepped fields on hillsides that slowed water runoff. Others developed more sophisticated irrigation networks or experimented with different crop varieties. These adaptations required coordinated effort, technical knowledge, and often generations of sustained investment. Climate variability often amplified the effects of soil degradation. Droughts that might have been manageable in healthy ecosystems became catastrophic when soils were already depleted. The reduced capacity of degraded land to retain moisture meant that even normal dry seasons created hardship. Conversely, heavy rains caused more severe erosion on exposed fields, washing away what little topsoil remained. Environmental stresses and human-caused degradation reinforced each other, creating feedback loops that accelerated decline. Societies found themselves increasingly vulnerable to natural variations they had once weathered successfully, their margin for survival narrowing with each passing generation. Not every civilization that experienced soil degradation collapsed entirely. Some adapted by changing agricultural practices, rotating crops, or allowing fields to lie fallow. Others shifted their economic base, relying more on trade or different forms of production. But adaptation required recognizing the problem early and possessing the institutional capacity to implement solutions. Many societies lacked one or both. The pattern repeats across continents and centuries. In North Africa, once fertile regions that supplied grain to the Roman Empire gradually became less productive. Overgrazing, deforestation, and changing climate patterns transformed agricultural landscapes into marginal lands that could support far fewer people than before. The historical record shows that civilizations do not fail because of a single catastrophe. They fail because accumulated stresses overwhelm their ability to respond. Soil degradation is one such stress, often invisible until its effects are widespread. It weakens the foundation on which everything else depends, creating conditions where other pressures, whether economic, social, or environmental, become unmanageable. Understanding this process matters because it reveals how fragile the relationship between societies and their environment can be. Civilizations that seemed powerful and enduring declined not through conquest or sudden disaster, but through the gradual exhaustion of the resources that sustained them. The lesson is clear. Long-term stability requires maintaining the health of the systems that support life, even when those systems seem abundant and inexhaustible. When societies ignore this reality, decline follows, not as punishment but as consequence.